The moment my daughter Sophia whispered, "Don't tell the neighbors you're my mother," something in my chest shifted. It wasn't a harsh command or a cruel remark, but the way she said it, almost as if she was trying to protect me from some unseen force, something she thought I wouldn't understand. It was quick, barely moving her lips as if afraid someone might overhear. But the message was clear. I was a secret in her life, not a presence she was proud to claim. And as I stood there in the pristine hallway of her suburban home, trying to wrap my mind around the tension, I suddenly felt a deep, unsettling truth unfurling in my stomach. It was like the faintest, most delicate thread had snapped, and with it, my whole understanding of what I thought our relationship was began to unravel. I didn't ask her why she said it. In fact, I didn't ask anything at all. Instead, I just smiled politely, the kind of smile I had perfected over the years, the one that hid the weariness I felt in my bones, the one that softened my growing sense of alienation. Outside the large bay window, I could see a neighbor in golf shorts watering his perfect lawn, his face smooth, untouched by any sense of real emotion. He waved at me, as if I were nothing more than a guest, someone who had no deeper connection to this place, to this family, just a visitor passing through. I waved back, my hand feeling too heavy, too old, and my heart a little more detached than I would have liked. The house was immaculate, pristine in a way that only new wealth can afford. Everything was polished and carefully curated. Every corner of the space seemed to exist solely for the purpose of being admired, not lived in. The walls were adorned with abstract paintings I didn't understand. The floors gleamed with a cold, clinical perfection. I felt myself becoming smaller, as though I was shrinking into the corners of their picture-perfect life, as though I had no place in it. Not really. This wasn't a home where family mattered. It was a home where appearances ruled, where people like me, old, frail, and sentimental, had no place. And Sophia, my daughter, the one who had once laughed with me over family dinners, had become someone who didn't want to be seen with me, didn't want to be connected to me. It was as if I had become something to hide, something that didn't fit into her carefully constructed world. The day I arrived, I had just finished a long flight from Oregon to Connecticut. 2 planes and a bumpy taxi ride. I had brought with me a small suitcase and a tin of my raspberry scones, the kind Daniel used to devour when he was a boy, the kind I had made for him over and over again in those years when I was still young enough to think my presence meant something. I was stiff from the trip, my knees aching with every step, but I didn't complain. I never did. Not when I worked double shifts at the clinic, not when I paid for his college, not when I signed the papers for the house he now lived in, the house he now called his own. A house that was technically as much mine as his, given I had paid the down, payment in full, the money I had saved over decades of quiet, unacknowledged sacrifices. But none of that mattered anymore. As I stepped into the foyer, Daniel barely glanced at me. "Take your shoes off here," he said, his voice as efficient as ever. "Carla just had the floors polished." His tone was one I knew well, a tone that suggested I should be grateful to be in his space, that I should silently obey without question. I bent down to unlace my walking shoes slowly, my fingers trembling just slightly as I did. The entryway gleamed with expensive tile, and I noticed an abstract painting on the wall that I couldn't make sense of. There was no place to hang my coat, so I held it in my hands, feeling small, like an outsider. Carla, his wife, came in from the kitchen holding a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. She gave me a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Marianne, welcome," she said, her voice strained, rehearsed. "We weren't sure which flight you were on." I nodded, trying to make myself visible in their world. I wanted to say something, anything to bridge the gap, to prove that I was still a mother, still someone they had once loved. But I couldn't find the words. She turned back to the kitchen before I could say a thing. The whole scene felt like a performance, and I was the prop. "We've got a full house this weekend," Carla said, almost as if I were a guest at a retreat. "Neighborhood social tonight. Hope that's okay." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was telling me what I should be okay with. She wasn't inviting me to be part of their world. She was simply letting me know I was tolerated, not welcomed. Daniel, without missing a beat, took my coat and hung it in a narrow closet next to the door. Not the hall closet, that one was full of designer jackets and polished shoes, the kind of clothes that matched the kind of life they wanted people to believe they had. The guest room was clean but cold, like a hotel room waiting for someone to check in for a night and leave. There were no books, no chair to sit in, nothing to make it feel like a place where someone actually lived. Just a bed and a small suitcase stand, like I wasn't even supposed to settle in. On the nightstand sat a small card with the Wi-Fi password printed on it, a reminder that I was a visitor, not family. I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs aching from the flight. I didn't unpack, not yet. Instead, I took a deep breath, let the silence wash over me, and let it settle into my bones. Tomorrow, I would walk around the neighborhood just to clear my head, just to remind myself that I was still capable of moving through the world on my own terms, even if they didn't see me that way. I didn't belong here. Not really. I wasn't part of their life, their perfect life. I wasn't a part of the family, at least not in the way I had once been. But I wasn't ready to let go of that just yet. The first time I noticed something was off was when Sophia asked me to meet with a jewelry appraiser. It was early one morning, the kind of crisp, clear day when you could almost believe the world was still full of possibilities. But there was a chill in the air that mirrored the growing distance between us. Sophia had been strangely distant in the weeks leading up to that day. It wasn't just the usual busy work-life routine she used as an excuse for why she couldn't visit. No, it was something else, something more deliberate. Her smile, once so genuine, had become strained, like she was trying to hide something behind it. It wasn't until she told me about the appraiser, a man named Charles, who was apparently an expert on high-value pieces, that I realized what was happening. She explained in a tone that was far too casual. "We're just going to go through your collection, make sure everything's valued properly." You know, for the future, it wasn't the future I had in mind. I had spent years collecting those pieces. Not for investment, not to leave a legacy of wealth, but for the memories they carried. Each one had a story. The sapphire bracelet I wore to my 40th birthday. The diamond earrings Daniel had given me for our anniversary. The pearl necklace I had worn to the gala the year I became a mother. These weren't just things. They were markers of time, of love, of laughter and tears. And yet, here was Sophia, asking me to value them like they were commodities to be bought and sold, as though they meant no more to me than an old painting gathering dust in a corner. When Charles arrived, he barely acknowledged me, let alone the significance of the pieces I had gathered over the years. His hands, cold and impersonal, brushed over the delicate chains and brooches, examining them with the clinical precision of someone who saw only dollar signs. He didn't care about the way the light caught the facets of the diamonds, or how the weight of the gold reminded me of the moment I had first held each piece in my hand. He simply typed numbers into a small device, cataloging each item with the kind of detachment one might reserve for a pile of old furniture to be auctioned off. Every time he remarked on their value, his voice took on a mechanical tone, as though I were nothing more than a bystander in this whole transaction. Sophia hovered in the background, watching intently, her eyes darting from one piece to the next. She was quiet, too quiet, as though she was waiting for something. I tried to ignore the feeling that she was waiting for me to give my consent for something, but it nagged at me, gnawing at my insides like a slow-burning fire. Finally, after what felt like hours, Charles left, his briefcase full of the appraisals, and Sophia turned to me with that tight, practiced smile of hers. "We've made a list, Mom," she said, her voice too bright, too forced. "We'll need to decide which pieces you want to keep for sentimental reasons, and the rest will go to auction. It's the best option, really. It'll make sure the family is taken care of." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked down at the pieces spread out on the velvet cloth before me. The bracelet Daniel had bought me during our trip to Paris. The earrings my late sister had given me on her deathbed. The ring I had worn the day my first grandchild was born. These weren't just jewels. They were fragments of my life, my history. And yet, here I was, sitting in the midst of them, feeling as though I was being asked to give away parts of myself. Sophia's words felt distant, like they were coming from someone else entirely, someone I no longer recognized. The best option. The words echoed in my mind, and I realized with a cold, hard certainty that for her, these pieces were nothing more than a means to an end. I had always known that Sophia had a way of seeing things in a practical, almost transactional way, but this was different. It wasn't about making things easier or better. It was about erasing the past, erasing me. I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my chest, but I couldn't quite bring myself to say anything. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't trusted me to make my own decisions, why she hadn't even considered asking me how I felt about the jewelry. But instead, I just sat there, holding my breath, as she continued to explain how the auction would go, how we could use the proceeds to help with the family's future. She mentioned things like college funds for the grandchildren and the house, renovations that really should be done sooner rather than later. And all I could think was that she hadn't asked me what my future looked like. Sophia looked at me, waiting for some kind of approval, some sign that I was okay with everything. But I wasn't. I wasn't okay with any of it. This wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about my place in her life, my place in the world she was trying so desperately to create. A world where I was nothing more than a relic, something to be stored away and forgotten until it was needed. I had always tried to be supportive, always tried to help, to give. But now, in this moment, I realized that all I had given was my silence, my compliance, and in return, I had been discarded. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I had intended, and I felt a weight settle over me, like I was carrying something much heavier than I had ever imagined. "Sophia," I said, my voice trembling, "this jewelry, it's not just for you to take. It means something. It means everything." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't understand, and I knew she wouldn't. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. As Sophia continued talking about the logistics of the auction, about the cataloging and the listing prices, I felt a sharp, almost irrational urge rise within me. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let them erase me like this, reduce my life to a few cold, calculated numbers. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger, at least not entirely. It was something deeper, something that had been buried for years, something that had been waiting for this moment to surface. I made up my mind, right then and there. I would not let them sell me off like some old piece of furniture. I would not be erased. I would reclaim what was mine, what had always been mine. The jewelry was a symbol, yes, but more than that, it was my last tether to a life that had once been filled with love, with connection, with meaning. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them take it from me, not without a fight. The days following the appraisal passed in a haze of politeness, detachment, and a quiet erosion I wasn't supposed to notice. Sophia had made it seem like a formality, a responsible step, a gesture of forward-thinking stewardship on behalf of the family. But I saw it for what it was: a gentle erasure wrapped in soft voices and administrative smiles. No one outright said I had no use for jewelry anymore. No one said I was too old to keep beauty or history or gold. But everything in their tone implied that beauty now belonged to the young, and that memories should be converted into assets. And so I watched day after day as the process continued. Pieces were boxed, photos were taken, descriptions written up. Sophia sat at the kitchen island with her laptop, cross-referencing auction houses and smiling at projections like she was planning a birthday party. Meanwhile, I sat near the window, pretending to read, my hands clenched too tightly around a book I didn't remember opening. Each morning, Sophia offered me something trivial: a croissant, a peppermint tea, an article about longevity. She never offered me the one thing I wanted: a say. She had already made the decisions, and the small courtesies were just a way to keep me calm. "This will help pay for Ellie's ballet school," she said one morning, as if the justification would soften the loss. I nodded, because it was expected of me. I nodded, because I had already tried saying no, and my no had bounced off the lacquered walls of their perfect home and vanished somewhere between the sub-zero fridge and the voice-activated lights. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted compliance. And compliance, after all, had always been my currency. But this time, something different was growing inside me. A kind of weight that settled not in the chest, but in the spine. A resistance that didn't rise up in anger, but solidified slowly into certainty. One afternoon, I heard her on the phone with her husband, laughing softly. "She hasn't even asked for a reserve price," she said. "I think she just wants to see them one last time. One last time. As if I were dying. As if I were a fading patient admiring a sunset I would never see again." I felt a nausea that had nothing to do with illness. It was the nausea of vanishing, the slow sinking into irrelevance while the world around you moves on with cheerful efficiency. The next day, she invited me to the auction preview, not as an owner, not even as a mother, but as a guest. "It'll be a nice outing," she said, like I was a patient in a care facility. "You can see how beautifully everything's displayed." It's an art gallery. Really? I wanted to refuse. I wanted to scream that I wasn't interested in watching the dissection of my life under glass. But something inside me clicked into place. Not defiance. Not yet. Curiosity. A kind of grim curiosity. The kind you feel when staring down a disaster, needing to see if it's as bad as you imagined. So I said yes. We arrived at the auction house the next morning. The building was cool and modern, all brushed steel and quiet air. People moved slowly through the space, murmuring in reverent tones, sipping espresso from paper cups. Sophia introduced me to someone, I don't remember his name, and said, "This is my mother. She's the original owner of some of the pieces." Original owner, as if I were the builder of a property being flipped. The man smiled warmly and moved on. I walked alone, letting her drift ahead of me with her tablet and her notes, and found myself standing in front of a glass case. There they were. Not all of them. Just a selection. The sapphire pendant, the emerald drop earrings, the enamel brooch shaped like a magnolia, my mother's, passed to me the day I turned 30. The tags were printed on thick cardstock with fine lettering, vintage European, mid-century design, minor wear, excellent condition. There was no mention of Capri, of Paris, of winter evenings in front of fireplaces with red wine and laughter. There was no space for memory in the typography, only provenance, price, and potential. I stood there for a long time. So long that a young woman approached and asked if I had any questions. She had kind eyes and a quiet voice. And I realized I must have looked out of place, like someone who had wandered in from another time. "No," I said. "They just look familiar." She smiled, not unkindly, and moved on. I watched her go and wondered if she had a grandmother, if she would recognize the sound of history when it was whispered, or if she, too, would one day stand in a room full of catalogued love, trying not to tremble. That evening, I went home and opened a drawer in the guest room where I had kept a few things: letters, a worn photograph, an old address book. At the bottom was a small velvet pouch, one Sophia hadn't seen. Inside, it was a ring, a modest one, amethyst and gold. Nothing extraordinary to the market, but everything to me. It had been the first gift Daniel gave me after Ellie was born. He had come home with it tucked inside his coat, grinning like a boy, and said, "You deserve color." Everything about you deserves color. I hadn't worn it in years. I slipped it onto my finger and held my hand up to the lamplight. It still fit. That was when I made my decision. Not a rash one, not a tantrum. Just a slow, full breath of decision. I would not watch my life be sold. I would not sit in the audience and clap politely while my past was auctioned off to strangers in linen blazers. I went online that night, quietly, methodically. I found the bidder registration page for the auction. I filled out the form, using my legal name, not the affectionate diminutive everyone used. I listed a bank account, one I had opened in my name only years ago, just after Daniel's funeral, when I'd realized that a woman with no secret place to keep money was a woman who could be erased overnight. It wasn't a large account, but it was mine alone. Sophia didn't know, no one did. It was the same account I had used to buy a train ticket to visit my sister when she was ill. The same account I used to send Kieran money for textbooks when Sophia said he should learn to budget better. Quiet money, self-earned, untouched by their narratives. I received the bidder number the next day. It arrived in my inbox, with a simple subject line: Bitter Confirmation, Lot Series 72A. Just like that, I was no longer a passive observer. I was in the room. That night, at dinner, Sophia talked about the seating arrangements for the auction. Who would be there? Who might buy what? Some really good buyers coming, she said. A couple of celebrity stylists even expressed interest. Your taste is timeless, Mom. Really? I nodded. I didn't ask where I would sit. She hadn't offered me a place beside her, and I had stopped expecting one. Instead, I said something about how I hoped the buyers appreciated the pieces, how I hoped they'd be worn, not just stored. She smiled, the way one smiles at a pleasant invalid. Oh, I'm sure they'll be loved. But I knew better. The auction wasn't about love. It was about ownership. It was about turning history into liquidity. And I had decided, quietly, calmly, that my history would not be converted into someone else's asset. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The day of the auction preview arrived, and with it, an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. I had spent the morning carefully selecting my outfit, a deep navy dress that had always made me feel elegant without being ostentatious. It wasn't flashy or new. It was simply one of those pieces that had always been comfortable in its simplicity, like the perfect pair of shoes that somehow fit no matter how many times you've worn them. The jewelry, the one piece I had decided to keep for myself, a single diamond bracelet that had belonged to my mother, was carefully fastened around my wrist, as if I were stepping into some kind of ritual, a quiet rebellion that felt much larger than I could express. I had no plan to make any noise, no intention of stirring trouble, but something inside me, something I hadn't fully realized until now, told me that I was no longer going to simply watch as my life and memories were stripped away. Sophia had sent the car around, and when I climbed inside, I could see her, sitting in the back seat, her phone pressed against her ear. She didn't look up when I entered, and for a moment, I wondered if she even realized I was there. She continued her conversation with someone on the other end, speaking in that fast, professional tone I had come to associate with her in recent years. It was as if she were speaking to a colleague, not a mother. I sat quietly, letting the world outside the window blur past, the colors fading in and out as the car wound its way through the city streets. I had been in this town before, but today it felt like a different place, as though I were a stranger passing through, one who had lost all connection to the rhythm of its streets, the faces, the memories. When we arrived at the auction house, I was surprised to find it much quieter than I had expected. The polished glass doors loomed in front of us, inviting and cold at the same time, like a gallery or a museum, a place where history was put on display but never truly experienced. As we entered, I was struck by the almost reverent hush of the room. The walls were lined with displays of jewelry, each piece encased in glass like some precious relic, a symbol of wealth and beauty that was now being divvied up to the highest bidder. It was all so clinical, so detached, as though the emotional connection I had to these pieces was completely irrelevant to anyone who was truly looking to buy them. Sophia was already engaged in conversation with a man near one of the cases, discussing the provenance of an item with such fervor that I almost couldn't believe it was about something that had once belonged to me. Her voice carried that sharp, authoritative tone I had grown accustomed to, the one that left no room for disagreement or hesitation. She was in charge here, and I, as always, was the outsider, the one who had never fully understood the intricacies of the world she was now a part of. The auctioneer, a slick man in a tailored suit, greeted us with a practiced smile and, without even pausing, directed us to a private area where we could view the catalog. He handed Sophia the glossy booklet, his fingers brushing hers with the kind of casual intimacy that seemed to signify a world I wasn't part of. And as he spoke about the pieces, I realized, not for the first time, that I had been reduced to a mere spectator in my own life. Sophia turned to me with a forced smile and said, "Let's take a look, Mom. You'll love how everything's displayed. You'll see. It's like walking into a gallery." I nodded and walked with her through the narrow hallway, my eyes scanning the glass cases, each one holding something that once held a piece of my heart. My mind was racing, and as I moved from case to case, I realized that I couldn't do this. I couldn't just watch as my life was parceled out like forgotten trinkets. This was not a gallery. This was a market, and I was being sold. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for the first time in years, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of ownership, of control. Not over the jewelry itself, but over my own narrative. At some point, I found myself standing in front of a glass case, my hands pressed against the cool surface as I looked down at the pieces inside. There they were, the sapphire earrings, the pearl necklace, the ruby brooch I had bought with the money I saved up from my first job after moving here with Daniel. Each piece shimmered in the light, beautiful and cold, without the warmth of memory to sustain them. I wanted to reach out, to touch them, but I couldn't. It would be like trying to hold on to something that wasn't mine anymore, something that had already been taken. And then, out of nowhere, I remembered the amethyst ring. It was small, simple, but it had always been mine. The one thing I had held on to for myself, not because of its value, but because it was a reminder of a time when I was truly myself. It had slipped from my finger years ago, and now it lay at the bottom of a drawer, forgotten, as though it had never mattered. But it had. It still did. And suddenly, I realized that I wasn't ready to let go of anything. Not yet. Sophia was still talking, still moving between cases, her voice carrying the same tone of authority. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was lost in my own thoughts, thinking about everything that had led me here. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed myself to be swept away by their agenda, by their view of what was valuable and what wasn't? I had always prided myself on being strong, on holding on to the things that mattered, the things that made me who I was. But somewhere along the way, I had let it slip. I had let them take over, to decide what was worth keeping and what was expendable. And now, standing here in this sterile, expensive space, I realized I had no one to blame but myself. It wasn't too late, though. I could still change things. I could still take back control. The auctioneer returned, asking if we were ready to begin, and I looked at Sophia, who was standing by a case, her expression unreadable. She had no idea what was going through my mind. She probably thought I was fine, that I was just another well-behaved elderly woman who didn't mind her things being sold. But I wasn't. I was something else now, something different than the quiet woman who had sat by and watched as her life was slowly dismantled. I was ready to fight for it. I was ready to take back what was mine, even if it meant doing something I hadn't planned on. I wasn't just going to stand here and watch as they wiped away the last of my memories. I excused myself from the group, my legs carrying me through the space like they were moving on their own. I had made up my mind. There was no turning back now. The quiet, controlled voice inside me that had always known what to do, what to say, what to give, had finally given way to something else. And for the first time in a long time, it felt good. It felt like I was finally reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost, like I was finally going to be the one to make the decisions. Not Sophia, not anyone else, just me. It was supposed to be a simple affair, just a weekend of browsing, a few bids, nothing more than the quiet passing of time, with a few things I had come to think of as mine. But the moment I placed my first bid, something changed. I didn't realize how much the act of raising my hand would do, how it would stir something deep inside me. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was a participant, someone with a claim to what had been taken from me without so much as a second thought. When the auctioneer's gavel came down, the reality of it all hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't just bidding on the pieces I cared about. I was bidding on the right to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged as more than just the woman who had outlived her usefulness. I was reclaiming not just objects, but a voice in the narrative that had been rewritten around me. And the moment I raised my paddle a second time, I knew it wasn't just about the jewelry anymore. It was about everything I had let slip away without protest. At first, there was silence, just the low murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the sound of Sophia's heels on the polished floor as she moved from one person to the next. Her presence a sharp contrast to the stillness that had settled around me. She didn't seem to notice at first, lost in conversation with someone she had met during one of her countless charity galas, someone who was already making bids on the rarest pieces. I could hear her voice, rising and falling in its familiar, confident cadence, but I wasn't listening. I couldn't. My thoughts were racing, each one louder than the last, each one urging me to continue, to press on, to claim something for myself before it was taken away again. And then it happened. I raised my paddle again, a quiet motion, one that almost seemed to blend with the surrounding noise of the auction house. But it wasn't just a motion. It was a decision. The pieces that had once been mine, that had once told the story of my life, now belonged to someone else. Or they would, if I didn't do something. The moment my paddle rose into the air, I could feel Sophia's gaze shift to me, sharp, focused, and immediately followed by the look of disbelief that spread across her face. It wasn't anger, not yet. But it was something worse, something colder. It was the unmistakable look of someone who had lost control, someone who had underestimated the person they thought they could keep in the background. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw the woman she had become, polished, distant, and cold. But beneath that exterior, there was a flicker of something else, something she hadn't expected. It was fear. She crossed the room quickly, her footsteps sharp, deliberate, as if she were trying to get to me before I could do any more damage. But I didn't back down. I didn't lower my paddle. Instead, I raised it again, just a fraction of an inch, enough to signal that I wasn't finished, that I wasn't going to let her take it all. Not without a fight. "Mom," she said, her voice strained, a mixture of disbelief and desperation that only made my resolve stronger. "What are you doing? You're not really going to do this?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. What was there to say? I had already said everything I needed to say with the movement of my hand. The fact that she didn't understand that she couldn't understand what I was doing, was both heartbreaking and infuriating. How had we gotten to this point? How had the woman I once knew, the one who used to laugh with me over Sunday dinners, become someone who couldn't even begin to comprehend the depth of my attachment to these things, to this life we had built together? "Mom," she repeated, her voice rising now, louder than before. "This is ridiculous. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're not in control of this. This is about the family, about taking care of everyone. You can't just hang on to these things because they remind you of the past. We need to think about the future." I turned to face her, finally meeting her eyes. And for a moment, I saw the flicker of recognition there. The one that had always been between us. The one that had been a part of our bond for as long as I could remember. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold calculation I had grown so familiar with. "I am thinking about the future," I said quietly, my voice steady, though my hands trembled ever so slightly. "But I'm also thinking about the past, about what really matters." She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she looked at me, her expression shifting as she realized that I wasn't the woman she had always known, that I wasn't the mother who would meekly fall in line when asked. I had already made my decision, and this time, she couldn't control it. I felt a presence behind me, and before I could turn, I heard a voice that I hadn't expected, that I didn't want to hear. "Martha, what is this?" It was Derek, Sophia's husband, stepping forward with the same calm, collected demeanor he had worn for years. He had always been the voice of reason in their relationship, the one who spoke with authority, the one who made the decisions. But today, his authority meant nothing. "I'm just doing what I should have done a long time ago," I said, my words coming out sharper than I intended. "I'm making my own decisions for once." Derek didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at Sophia, his expression one of disbelief, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. He had always been able to control the situation, always been able to dictate how things were going to go. But now it was different. I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, decide what was best for me anymore. "Martha," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "this isn't you. You've always been the one who kept things in perspective, who knew when to let go." I looked at him, my eyes narrowing slightly. I know when to let go, but I also know when to hold on. And this is something I'm not ready to let go of. There was a long pause as Derek processed my words, his face going through a series of emotions. Confusion, frustration, and finally, something I hadn't expected. A flicker of respect. It was gone in a moment, replaced by the same dismissal I had come to expect. But for a brief second, I saw him see me. Really see me. Sophia moved closer now, her voice low but urgent. "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't just about the jewelry. It's about what's best for everyone. This isn't about you anymore." "No," I replied, the words coming out more forcefully than I had planned. "It's always been about me. It's always been about what I want, what I need. I've spent years taking care of everyone else. Now it's my turn." For a moment, no one said anything. The auctioneer stood quietly by, watching. perhaps sensing that things were escalating far beyond what he had anticipated. Sophia was frozen, her expression one of pure shock, as though I had slapped her in the face. Derek, too, looked taken aback, though I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating how to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. There was nothing they could say now that would make me change my mind. I turned to the auctioneer, my voice firm. "Keep going." I'm bidding on everything, and with that, the room seemed to shift. The cold, controlled atmosphere of the auction house, the polished surfaces, and the soft murmurs of wealthy buyers all became background noise to the only thing that mattered now. I was no longer going to be the woman who sat quietly by and let everything slip away. I was going to fight for it, every last piece. The room had fallen into a stillness I hadn't anticipated. Not silent. There was always noise in these places. The whisper of fabric as people shifted in their chairs, the distant clicking of pens, the murmured commentary of those who believed themselves above the fray. But still. Still in the way that happens when something unexpected has tilted the floor, when everyone feels the shift but no one wants to admit it. My bidder number sat firm in my hand, a rectangle of thin cardboard that had begun the day as just a formality, a way to gain entry into a room I thought I might only haunt. But now it felt heavy, not with paper, but with presence, with will. I held it not as a guest, not even as a challenger, but as the rightful participant in a ritual they had mistakenly believed I would observe with quiet resignation. I had bid on 5 pieces by then. 2 bracelets, 1 brooch, the coral earrings I had worn the day my mother died, and the necklace Daniel had saved for a year to buy me. His proud surprise the day I opened the box still warm in my chest, even now. Each bid had come with its own small quake. First came the disbelief from the crowd, then the glances toward Sophia, then the whispering. A few looked at me with the kind of fascination people reserve for the elderly when we do something unscripted. Some seemed amused, others mildly concerned, but I didn't flinch. I knew what they saw. A woman in her 80s, carefully dressed, deliberate in her movements, neither fragile nor fierce, just present. That alone was enough to unsettle the comfortable rhythm of the sale. Sophia had stopped speaking to me by then. Her last words had been an exasperated, "You're making a scene," hissed through clenched teeth during the bidding for the brooch, as if the act of claiming a thing that had been mine for 40 years was some kind of social betrayal. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I had passed the threshold where language mattered. The act itself was the speech. The auctioneer, to his credit, remained composed. He had the practiced neutrality of a man who had seen all kinds of strange behavior in rooms like this. Drunken heirs fighting over decanters, divorcees bidding each other into bankruptcy, collectors weeping over pieces they couldn't afford. But something about me must have made him pause. Maybe it was the way I sat, upright, eyes sharp, lips unmoving. Maybe it was the way I didn't blink at the prices, or how I reached for the paddle without hesitation. He watched me more closely now, not with suspicion, but with the wary attention reserved for the only real player at the table. And then came the moment they had all been waiting for, the marquee lot. The entire collection grouped as a single offering, 12 pieces, curated together, described as a lifetime of elegance. The phrase burned as it was spoken. A lifetime. Not a woman, not a person, a display, an aesthetic. The auctioneer lifted his voice slightly, reading from the card. An extraordinary ensemble spanning decades of taste and refinement. Provenance. Single owner. Private collection. Opening bid. 70,000 euros. I raised my paddle. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone on the left, perhaps a buyer from Madrid, I had seen her flipping pages and whispering numbers earlier, made a counterbid. I raised again. The numbers escalated, climbing higher, each figure echoing in my chest like a footstep on a marble floor. Sophia stood now, pacing behind the last row, her arms crossed so tightly across her chest, I thought she might crack her own ribs. Derek spoke to her in low tones, gesturing toward me, toward the auctioneer, toward the ceiling, as if God himself might intervene. 100,000, 110, 120. Still I bid. My heart was steady, not calm, not detached, but steady in the way that comes only when the mind and body are in alignment, when every part of you knows what it is doing and why. This was not revenge. It was not drama. It was reclamation. At 135,000, the Madrid woman hesitated. The room was quiet again, air held in collective breath. I raised my paddle once more. 135,000 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice not faltering but slower now, as if each word needed careful measuring. Going twice. Gone. The gavel fell. The room exhaled. And just like that, it was done. The final lot was mine. I sat motionless as the reality settled in. The crowd began to murmur again, their attention drifting. The drama, for them, had ended. But for me, the moment was still unfolding. A slow unwinding of something that had been wound too tightly for too many years. Sophia was standing at the edge of the room, arms loose now, her face pale. She didn't approach. Derek did. He came forward with that tight-lipped professionalism he always wore, the kind that cloaked threat in concern. That was quite a performance, he said, not unkindly, but with the tone of a man who believed he still held the reins. You know there are legal implications. That's a substantial amount of money, Martha. We'll need to talk. I turned to him, and for the first time, I saw him not as my son-in-law, not as the man who had slowly restructured my daughter's sense of family, but as a stranger. We don't need to talk, I said. You do. You need to explain why you thought you could decide when my life was over. He blinked. It was a small thing, a half-second of genuine surprise, but I saw it. I stood. Slowly, not because I was old, but because I wanted to. You all thought I wouldn't notice, I continued, the quiet ways I was being erased, the conversations I wasn't invited into, the decisions made in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. You thought age made me compliant, that gratitude would make me obedient. But I've buried a husband. I've buried friends. I've lived through wars. You think I can't survive disappointment? Derek opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I'm done being polite. I left the room without looking back. The receptionist met me with the final paperwork. Her hands trembled as she handed me the documents, perhaps unused to such defiance, dressed in silver hair and soft perfume. I signed with the pen they provided, but I insisted on my own signature. The full one, not the shortened name Sophia insisted was cuter for the grandchildren. Outside, the sun had begun to set. The street was golden and quiet, the kind of light that makes everything feel cinematic, even grief. The driver asked if I needed assistance. I said no. I wanted to walk. My shoes weren't practical, but they held. My body, tired but upright. My hands, filled with paper and promise. I was not returning to the same house I had left that morning. I was walking forward. Into what? I didn't know yet. But it would be mine. The evening air was cool, and the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pools of yellow light onto the pavement. I had expected something. Perhaps the satisfaction of reclaiming what was once mine, the sense of victory that came with standing my ground in the face of those who sought to take it from me. But instead, I felt nothing but a quiet, profound emptiness. It wasn't the emptiness of defeat, nor was it a sense of victory. It was something deeper, more complicated, like a space opening within me, wide and unspoken. I walked slowly down the street, the soles of my shoes clicking against the concrete, each step a deliberate motion forward. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving the auction house. I hadn't called Sophia, hadn't let Derek know. They didn't deserve to be in the loop anymore, not after everything they had done to strip away what had mattered to me. I wasn't interested in their excuses or their reasons, not anymore. They had already made it clear that their lives, their expectations, were more important than my own, that my place in the family was to be seen and not heard. But I wasn't just a part of their structure, their framework. I had been, for too long, a background character in a play that wasn't mine to begin with. Now, as the city hummed quietly around me, I realized that I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone. I had spent years believing that my value came from my ability to serve, from the ways I helped, the ways I showed up. But now, for the first time in so long, I saw that I was enough. I was more than enough. I had no plan beyond the walk, no particular place to go. All I knew was that I needed space, time, to let this moment settle. The weight of what I had just done hung around me like a cloud, not heavy but constant, like the sound of distant thunder. I passed the familiar shops, the ones I had walked past 1,000 times before, and they all seemed to change, shift, as if they too understood the significance of what had happened. The old bookstore on the corner, the cafe where I used to meet friends for coffee, the small park where I had watched my children play years ago. They were the same, but they were also not. I had changed. Everything had changed. I wandered without thinking for what felt like hours. The sky had darkened, and the streetlights blinked to life one by one, casting a muted glow on the sidewalk. I didn't know where I was headed. I didn't need to. I had spent my entire life trying to predict the outcome, trying to make everything fit into neat, predictable boxes. But today, I had done something entirely unpredictable. I had done something just for me. The enormity of it hadn't quite hit me yet. I wasn't sure if it would ever fully sink in. Eventually, my feet led me to a bench in the park, where I sat down, still clutching the documents from the auction, the contract that had marked the turning point. I opened the envelope and let my fingers trace over the ink. I had purchased everything. Everything that had been sold off as just pieces, as valuables, as things of the past. I could have spent that money on a trip, on a house, on something new. But I didn't. I spent it on history, on me, on memories that belonged to no one else, memories I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I hadn't made this decision out of anger. I hadn't made it out of spite. I made it because I was tired of feeling like an afterthought, like a footnote in my own life. I had always done what was expected of me, had always put everyone else first, and now I was simply putting myself at the center of my own story. It felt strange, this new form of selfishness, but also freeing, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The night stretched on, and I stayed there for a while, watching the world pass by. People walked their dogs, couples sat on the other benches, their voices soft against the quiet hum of the city. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't need to. I didn't need anyone's approval or validation. For the first time, I was enough on my own. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Eventually, I returned to the flat. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the door clicked open, the familiar smell of the small apartment greeting me like an old friend. It wasn't much. A second-floor flat with mismatched furniture, a small kitchen that had seen better days. But it was mine. And that night, it felt like the most beautiful place in the world. I sat down at the small wooden table, the papers spread out in front of me. The contracts, the auction house's final bid sheet. My name in bold print, beneath each item I had purchased. I didn't have to explain it to anyone. Not to Sophia, not to Derek, not to anyone who didn't understand. I didn't need them to understand. What I needed was peace. What I needed was to know that I could make decisions for myself, that I could reclaim something that had been taken from me, that I could still find value in the things I held dear. My phone buzzed on the counter. I had turned it off when I left the auction house, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed silence. But now, as the buzzing continued, I sighed and picked it up. It was a message from Kieran. It had been days since we had last spoken. His message was simple. "Hi, Grandma. Just checking in. Hope everything is okay. Miss you?" I smiled, the warmth of his words washing over me like a wave. Kieran. He was the one who had never made me feel like an obligation. The one who had always known how to make me feel seen, even when I was invisible to everyone else. I typed out a quick reply. "I'm safe, darling. Don't worry." "I miss you too," I thought for a moment, staring at the screen, and then added, "Maybe we can meet soon. I have some things to show you." I sent the message and set the phone down on the table. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. I hadn't left anyone behind. I hadn't abandoned them. I had simply walked away from a life that wasn't mine anymore, a life that had been built on expectations and obligations, on the quiet erosion of my own identity. I hadn't lost my family. I hadn't lost my place in the world. I had simply released myself from the things that were never meant to define me. And as the night stretched on, I realized that I wasn't just surviving. I was living.